You're listening to the Common Descent Podcast. Hello, Meredith.
Hi, David. Hi, Will.
Hello, Will.
Hello, David.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I talked right over you. Welcome to the Common Descent Podcast. This is Spotlight 2024, a special series we're running all throughout the year, where we are sitting down to talk about science communication with some of our fellow podcasters, sci-commers in the realm of paleontology and related stuff. This episode, we are very delighted to welcome back to the podcast Meredith Johnson. Meredith, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's really fun to see you both again, and I'm excited to talk about podcasting and science communication.
Yes.
Us too. If you would please introduce yourself for any of our listeners who aren't familiar with you.
Sure. My name is Meredith Johnson, and I am the communications director for the Leakey Foundation, which is a nonprofit that has a dual mission of funding research and talking about it. And I make and host a podcast called Origin Stories, which is a show about human evolution.
Yes, and longtime listeners of our podcast will be familiar with Origin Stories because we like to plug Origin Stories from time to time on our podcast because it's fantastic. It's a really great podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing that.
No, absolutely.
And on that note, if you would please tell our listeners a little bit more about Origin Stories. If they want to go check it out after this discussion, which they totally should, what can they expect from the podcast?
Sure. So they can expect to hear stories about human origins. So
Aptly named.
Yeah.
That is direct advertising.
We're sort of a storytelling show that explores how humans came to be the way we are. We look at it through all different kinds of science, from paleoanthropology to primatology, geology, all kinds of things. And we just explore how we became human and how scientists are figuring that out.
There's something very satisfying about this sentence, exploring how we became human.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very cool sentence. Like that feels like a sci-fi sentence because it's not the way you usually hear us talk about ourselves, but I like it.
And Origin Stories often features a variety of voices, scientists, of various people with experience in the realms of anthropology and paleoanthropology.
Yes, yeah. I love that because I get to talk to so many different scientists and hear about so many different discoveries. And our show is a narrative storytelling show. It's not straight science and it's not an interview show, although sometimes we do run interviews. I don't feel I'm strong there. I like to do the narrated story where we can plot out an interview and try to get all the good, all the storytelling elements from the scientists themselves and hear about, what it's like to do this work in their own words, what it's like to follow a chimp through the forest or find a fossil and be the first person to, pull it out of the ground after 1,000,000 years or 2 or 3 or 5.
Yeah. Like focusing on the experience of doing those things.
Yes.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So it's really, I love that. And then I just play the part of the narrator, like helping move through the story. And sometimes I like to take, the more complex or like specific parts of science and make a little shorthand or a little, I like to interpret it, I guess, in a storytelling way.
Yeah.
Help break it down.
Like give context and
give that context. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, context, explanations, all that good stuff.
I'm excited to dive into more discussion about the format and the stories you're telling. But before we do that, the question that I want to ask to set the stage is, in your mind, what are the goals? What is the mission of Origin Stories?
Well, I guess my simple answer to that is that the mission of the show is to share the human story that we all share and help people understand themselves in a different way by knowing more about that, about our origins and evolution. And then I would say I have some like little add-on goals
Mm-hmm.
in addition to the main mission.
Side missions.
Yeah, little side quests of of this, and that mission is really because it's the mission of the Leakey Foundation too, and I'm their communications director, so we're all about sharing science to everyone. But I like to connect with people who are interested in this topic. So my side goals are to share the research that we're funding, like through the people telling their stories, which I think is my favorite way to do it, to connect with other people who are interested in this topic, because it can be a little lonely the way I do, the way I'm working. So it's fun to hear from people who love this science and want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And then like a sort of a selfish reason is because I get to meet a lot of scientists and go to cool places, and I get to see fossils and hear about fossils and talk about fossils.
It is one of the best parts of doing something, whether it's podcasting or reporting or whatever, something that is built around interviewing and gathering information from the people doing it, is that you then get to talk to all these cool people who are doing cool things
and are enthusiastic about it.
Yeah. You get to nerd out with the nerds, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and there's nothing better than the enthusiasm, and the curiosity that scientists have. I love it so much.
Yes.
And this has become a theme in this series, that a lot of the podcasters we talk to have at least some selfish reasons for doing their podcast the way they do, which I think is essential because you have to enjoy it.
Yes.
That's the joy of this experience comes from, in part, what you're getting out of it, in addition to what you're giving through it. And I think that it is really telling that so many of the science communicators we've talked to in this series have that moment where they go, also, I love it because of this, and this reason. And yeah, that's great. That's how it should be.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it's fun to be able to be the person who's like, oh my gosh, I heard about this really cool thing. Let me tell you about this cool thing that you're going to love and think is cool too.
Yep.
So it's fun all around.
Yeah. So there are so many things that I want to get into, but I want to start with the topic of stories.
Okay.
You've already mentioned this a couple times in your description. Obviously, it's right there in the name of your podcast. It's Origin Stories. In your view, what is the value and the importance of storytelling as a form of science communication?
I think that because humans are storytellers and story listeners, like we're just so keyed into stories. So you can start to tell someone anything, any kind of story. If you put it in the form of a story, people will be interested. And for me, my first job at the Leakey Foundation was planning lectures, and the lectures were awesome, really great. And I loved to hear how the scientists thought through how they'd like to present their work to somebody who was not a specialist. But I would always find myself most interested in the personal experience story parts, and kind of like editing their presentations in my head sometimes. And then afterwards I would get to like go to lunch with them or walk around and talk, and they would tell me all these stories that were just fascinating and so incredible. Whether it's a story about like how they put together their field camp, or how they got to be a scientist, or what went wrong when they were doing their work. And so I knew this was a way to share the science that these folks are doing to a broader audience through the stories that I feel like these scientists are already really good at telling, and they're motivated to share.
Yeah.
We hear a lot of talk these days in the realm of science communication about stories and storytelling. And I think that one thing that I know for me, it took me a little while to pick up on this, is that story can mean so many different things, right? That it isn't just a story that, that has a 3-act structure and a call to action and a beginning and a middle and an end. That, like you're saying, just a person telling a little anecdote about their experience, or what made you start this research, or how did it feel for you. Stories really are about that personal connection and that personal experience. And it can mean so, and therefore there's so much to work with when it comes to telling stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so much to work with within the realm of science. If I think about, and I think a lot about story structure, and I've read so much about it, and I try to dissect stories and movie plots and things like that all the time. And in our show, when we're making it, we often go back to what happened, and then what happened next, and then what happened next, and then what happened next, and then how did you feel about that? And then there are all these mechanisms that you can use to tell stories about science that humans just are keyed into. Like even the structure of a scientific paper,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a story. It's like, I had this question, here's what I was thinking, and then I did this, and I did this, and I did this, and I learned this, and then here's how this relates to everything other people know, and now we're going to try some more.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
But all the voice of the person telling it and the specifics of what happens can really come together to make science connect, feel like a human endeavor, which it is.
Well, and I really like that approach because very often science reporting or communication or just as a topic in general can feel very, or many people at least have expressed that can feel very sterile, very technical, very like reading a instruction booklet, even if it's for something fun like a game. That's very just, here are the technical things you need to know, which is perfectly fine and sometimes the correct way to report, but I don't think it often is considered that science being a thing that lends itself to storytelling by a lot of people. So I appreciate your approach to it and pointing out that there's tons of stories to be told in science.
Yeah. And I know it's different than what a scientist communicates to other scientists. It has to be specific, it has to be technical, it has to be complete, and not a lot in modern scientific papers. It's not the same in the old ones, especially in paleoanthropology, but it has to be very kind of unemotional and technical and replicable. Your aim is to communicate really specific things.
Yeah, like a user manual.
Yeah, totally. Or game instructions. Absolutely. Because,
Yeah.
That's a good analogy.
Well, and often part of the challenge is finding the way to take something that is often delivered in one particular format or is written in a particular format and then find that narrative structure, find that story. We've talked a lot over the course of this series with our other guests about balancing entertainment with education, and we've talked a bunch about the production of science communication, that there's always a bit of fabrication that goes into it. We are putting pieces together in a specific way. At this point in this recording, you will not have heard me cough just now because we will have edited that out.
Yep.
And it's a real balancing act to find how much do we produce and how much of the authentic original thing do we leave in. That I am, and I imagine especially for a podcast like yours, where it is so much emphasizing that storytelling aspect, that is a major part of the work of what you do.
Yes, it is a major part because at the heart of it, you need people to be able to trust that they're getting accurate information from this show, even if it's wrapped in a narrative. And so we're very careful with that, even though none of the folks who work on the show were not scientists. But I check, and I'm like, here's how we're going to frame this part of your research. Is this accurate? Are you okay if we leave out a lot of the method section of your, your research? Because sometimes that can be super interesting, and I like that. But I'm fortunate to work with an amazing story editor named Audrey Quinn. So she doesn't edit the audio, but she helps structure the stories, and she helps let me know, like, here's where I'm losing interest, or here's where I'm confused, or like, could you say this first? And then I'll understand what comes next better.
Cool.
But we always have the core, like, facts of the science.
Yeah. I appreciate the shout out to editors And I think I've worked with editors in journalistic writing and in educational video script writing. You've mentioned editing as it applies to your podcasting. Much like in literature or any form of writing, editors are often the unsung heroes of how this information comes together in a format that the intended audience can understand and can appreciate.
Yeah, because you can get so in the weeds of the story or be like, well, people really need to know about the occipital bone or whatever. No.
Yeah.
Well, you can get in the weeds of the science, of course, and lose track of what your audience is going to be engaged by. But also, yeah, you can get lost in the weed. I'm sure that everyone has experienced this at some point where you're telling a story or you're relating an anecdote and you get partway through it and you go, I didn't need to tell this part. I'm losing everybody. This is actually tangential to the actual story. This has nothing to do with where I'm going. I don't remember how I started. I'm so sorry.
It's a classic ADHD storytelling method of, have you seen this actor? Well, they're from the show. Let me explain that show, and then we'll get back to why I mentioned that person.
Yep.
And that's why editors are important.
Oh, gosh. Do you work as editors for each other, or what's your editorial process like, if I may ask?
No, absolutely. We definitely have in regards, because like we don't get to do this with every episode we prep, but a lot of times when we are able to be on task with it, we try to outline episodes these days together to go through what sections we both think make sense and what the kind of goal is, but then we will often try to touch base when taking notes, because I definitely run into the problem where I will get into a part of the notes and get zoomed in of like, oh, I didn't know there was this much about this animal, about the feather or the eye, and then I end up taking 20 minutes worth of conversation of notes on a part that really should only be about 5 minutes, if that. And I've definitely had times where I've come to Dave and be like, here's the things I'm getting kind of stuck, and Dave will be like, yeah, I think we could probably mention that passingly to be the nice way of like, no, don't do all that.
You're doing a lot of work.
Yes.
So yeah, we try to organize the episodes. And of course, our podcast is much less. It's not narrative. We do try to put a structure that flows. Sometimes it's chronological. Sometimes it's just. Sometimes it's following the anatomy of a particular thing we're talking about.
We still want it to build on itself as you go through it.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that comes across really well in your show. It's so well structured, and you can really follow and learn. And
thank you.
Oh, well, thank you.
From a guest perspective, too, you're super organized, and you let us know what's your outline. What are we going for? I love it so much.
Thank you. That means a lot.
That is the goal. I'm going to bring this up again in just a second. Once it's recorded, then the editing is mostly just cleanup editing. Unless there's some remarkable tangent that Will has to remove in the editing. So it does mean that we have to put in a lot of thought ahead of time, that there isn't as much we can do after the recording to sort of reorganize things or trim things up too much. Once it's recorded, that's mostly what it's going to be. So a lot of our organizational work in that regard happens up front.
Yeah. Usually the only time I have to do major shifting is if we like partway through recording went, ooh, I meant to say a thing and I didn't.
now that whole couple sentences just has to be out of here.
So please take this and put it there and make it fit or replace what I did say. And then often I'll have to be like, cool, but the way you introed it on the last one, on the first time was better. So I want to keep that.
And just smash them up.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of our show, I mean, it takes a long time to make an episode of Origin Stories. A really, really long time.
I was going to say, it sounds like you're doing a lot of the steps of like a movie production of getting the recording, getting the
footage,
the film. Yeah, exactly. And then having to talk with an editor of like, how do we best put this, how do we arrange this into a thing that feels like a cohesive structure. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, we had an editorial meeting today for a story that we're working on about a researcher who's studying musicality and how
Ooh.
like what's the same and what's different about humans and other animals with regards to music and
Cool.
musical like things. And we've been working on this episode for something like 4 months.
Wow.
And we just do rounds and rounds and rounds of edits. So yeah.
That's
Yeah.
incredible.
Well, I will say it shows in the final product of episodes of Origin Stories that they are very well organized, they're easy to follow, and they're engaging. And I think that to oversimplify things, that's kind of the top priority at the end of the day is people have to want to listen to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's where, like, as podcasters, we're really fortunate. Like, it's different than other kinds of science communication where you're speaking to an audience who may or may not be interested. Like with the podcast, they have to seek it out. They chose to download this episode and listen because something about it was, maybe it was recommended to them, but more likely than not, they were searching.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's already some buy-in
Yes.
at
Yeah.
the start.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, I don't know. And podcast audiences are just really great, and really, it's fun to make stories for people who want to listen to the stories.
Yeah. No, they're pretty delightful.
Well, speaking of podcast audiences and following up on your very kind feedback that you said, as we've said before in this series, if you want to be a guest on the podcast, if you say nice things about us, we'll invite you onto the podcast.
Moves you to the front of the line.
Oh, put you right up there in the front. Meredith's been on twice. One of the biggest challenges with podcasting is knowing that you're even reaching people or knowing who you're reaching. It isn't like giving a lecture or something where the audience is right there in front of you and you can see them and you can see how they're responding and someone will come up to you afterwards and tell you exactly what they thought about it. What is your process or your philosophy for, put simply, knowing that people are listening and knowing that people are enjoying what you're putting together?
Well, I check our statistics to get the broad numbers as much as you can. And you can see a little bit of like what country were they in or how far through the episode did someone listen?
Yep.
Yep.
But then other than that, with podcasting, you don't get a lot. And because Origin Stories is under the umbrella of the Leakey Foundation, it doesn't really have its own presence like on social media apart from the foundation. So I don't get to connect with people that way about the show. So I guess if people email me or tell me, I know. I would like to know more, like how people are receiving the show or what do they want to know about, or is there a cool fossil they want to know about or a scientist or a, topic. I would like to have more direct connection with the audience, but I'm also very shy. So, yeah.
Yeah. It really is the sort of double-edged sword of podcasting that it's harder to provide feedback to a podcast inside. It's not like a YouTube video where the comment section is right there while you're watching it or on social media.
Yeah.
You have to kind of try. You have to want to get in touch with people.
Go leave a review or send an email or something.
And on the one hand, that means I think that there is a great filter. That means that most of the feedback you get is nice.
Yes.
Because it's not the off the top of my head, whatever I thought, leaving a YouTube comment. It's a person who actually wanted to say something. But on the other hand, you don't get a lot of direct feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know like some podcasts really put a lot into building a community around it. And I love that as a listener. I listen to a lot of podcasts and that's awesome. And I wonder about it sometimes of whether I should try. I mean, we're coming up on 10 years as a show and
which is awesome.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I got to figure out what to do for that. But yeah, I would just like to hear from people who listen to the show and learn what they think of it. I read reviews, and that's great. And then recently we've started to ask for listener support.
Cool.
which we hadn't much before. Even though we are a nonprofit, the Leakey Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit that depends on donor support. And we have, over the past, I think, 3 episodes, been explicitly saying, hey, help us make this show. If you like it, let us know and give us $1 or something,
Yeah.
There's no better way to know that people like what you're doing than when people voluntarily provide not only the wonderful emotional support of kind words, but financial support.
Yep.
It's like, wow, you must really like what we're doing. You're going to put down money for it.
Yeah, because you all have a Patreon, right?
Yes.
We do.
Yes, we do.
We've had some great success with Patreon, social media, and Discord as means for connecting with our audience.
Yeah, we have a decent communities on those, and it really does make a difference when you can actually kind of chit chat with at least a portion of your listeners, a portion of your audience. It is pretty cool. It's neat. I like it.
Yeah, I think I would like that too. I don't know if Origin Stories listeners would be into it. I don't know.
I bet they would.
Yeah.
I've been consistently surprised with our podcast at how much a portion of our audience wants to chat with us and chat with each other. It's a lot of fun.
We were kind of on the fence about like Discord just because neither of us knew how to use it.
Sure.
But then we were also like, I mean, is it even going to be worth it?
Does anybody care?
Yeah. Is anybody sign up? And then, people signed up and they're having fun.
Here's what we'll do. Listeners, if you would join an Origin Stories Discord or something similar, get in our Discord and tell us.
Yes.
And then we'll tell Meredith how many people gave positive feedback.
Awesome. Or I could just join your Discord. Do I have to have an invite link?
You can find the link to our Discord on our website. If you go down to the page, there are links in the episode description.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Awesome. Because I would like to talk about other kinds of fossils too with other people.
Absolutely.
There's fun discussions that go on in there.
You would be immensely welcome within our Discord community. There's a lot of Origin Stories fans among our fans.
Oh, cool.
As I think there should be.
That's great. That's awesome.
Well, this little impromptu advertisement leads me nicely to the next question that I wanted to ask, which is, you are, as you explained before, your job at the Leakey Foundation is not just doing the podcast. You are involved in communications generally, in marketing. You mentioned before that your team of people, by and large, aren't academic scientists, with a background, doing research and all that.
Yep.
In what ways do you feel like your background influences your chosen styles of science communication?
That's an interesting question. I feel like I can put myself in the place of somebody who, because this is my experience. I took one anthropology class in college and I stayed interested, but it didn't and that's who I think about. I do social media as well, and I get to explain science in short form that way, which is really fun. And I'm thinking about, somebody who would be interested in seeing, a scientist at work in the field or a picture of a fossil. And I bet it would be somebody kind of like me who does like the natural world and science, or maybe watches documentaries or reads nonfiction books.
Yeah.
Or people who just like to hear cool facts. And that's a lot of people. If you look at something there's a lot of large social media accounts based on just cool facts or cool pictures or cool things in history. So I'm always looking at those, and a lot of them are kind of not great.
Yes, the things that foster engagement on the internet are unfortunately not just interesting true facts,
yes,
but things that evoke a wide range of emotions.
Yeah, and there's just a big difference in the podcasting science communication versus quick things that are supposed to grab someone's attention.
Yeah, while they're scrolling.
Yeah, while they're scrolling. How can you stop someone who's scrolling and make them click through if it's Instagram and read the caption? Or is it enough that you just showed them that this fossil exists? Or like, this is what a scientist looks like doing a thing. Because that's
Yes.
also important, you know, in America, we have a lack of trust in science. And yet, like, all of our lives depend on science and what we eat, how we exercise, how we are managing climate change or making decisions. And yet, in America, people don't understand or trust science or scientists as much as I wish they would. So it's good to be able to be part of the effort to help people learn about themselves and the world we live in all these different ways. I don't know if I answered your question.
No.
Absolutely.
I really like that of demystifying scientists doing their job, because I feel like a lot of people who have distrust is because so much of science happens behind the curtain of academia and labs and institutes, which is the places that it's perfectly fine for it to be happening.
That's where the equipment is.
Yeah, that's where that's what those places are for.
Yep.
But most people don't get a look in there ever.
Right.
So it feels like it's being purposely done behind closed doors. If you are completely disconnected, it can feel shady. So just demystifying, like, yeah, no, here's so and so that was on the episode doing their job. This is what it looks like when they do that thing they said.
Well,
that's it.
Like you said earlier, Meredith, stories are a distinctly human thing. You said humans are storytellers, which means that if there's a story, that's a human connection.
Yes.
You are immediately getting around some of that inaccessible feeling of science to something that people can directly connect with.
Yeah. What you both just said makes me wonder about like the feasibility of like a TV show.
Yeah.
Kind of like a Top Chef or something.
Like a reality show.
Yeah. Or, you know, a workplace. People love to watch people do their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And scientists' jobs are so interesting.
I feel like you could do like a I had a show for a second, like how it's made. Of like, how do we measure this, or how do we tell the weather? Here, let's go through the things that are done to do that.
And there's a lot of great social media accounts and YouTube series that do approach that kind of thing. One of the things, in my experience doing the social media for the Gray Fossil Site Museum, one of the things that I got into the habit of very quickly, partially because it is good social media practice, right? That if you look up how to do a good social media, all the advice will tell you put faces in it.
Yes.
The people who are scrolling will stop more frequently for a person on screen than they will for words or for other things. But also putting a picture, even if it's just a picture of someone in a lab, that there's a story there. You're showing this is what it looks like. This is what the people look like. Yeah. I loved, especially when we would have students and volunteers working in the lab, getting to post a picture and saying, yeah, here's this really important part of the scientific process. Here's this cool fossil that was dug up last year and now it's in the process of being worked on. And here's the person who's working on it, who's like a 19-year-old student at the university with bright pink hair and their headphones in. That's an incredible demonstration for people of what science looks like.
Yeah.
There is so much. I am far from the first person to suggest that a picture is the equivalent of an explanation.
But if you heard it here first.
If you heard it here first, a picture is worth a bunch of words, at least a handful of them.
Some amount.
And that's it's such a pervasive theme in science communication, podcasting or otherwise, to as much as possible connect people with human stories. I think origin stories is such an interesting case because you're not only connecting people with the stories of humans today who are doing the science, but so much of origin stories is also about the stories of humans from the past.
Humankind.
Humans in the, capital H.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I have like just an endless topic,
Yeah.
Like it can go in so many directions and look at so many aspects of humanity. And then it can stretch backwards in time or forwards in time. It's a lot of fun. And then all the different fields too, like I still haven't done a geology episode, and I'm supposed to be doing, I might talk to you guys about this, one about dating and time.
Oh yeah.
Oh, very fun.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to figure out like how would that translate to an audio story, or like I guess you could go kind of Carl Sagan-y on it. But I don't know. But I'm going to get to go to a lab and learn about all the different dating methods and all the machines they use and stuff like that.
Cool.
Excellent. Following off of that, I did want to ask, in the interest of doing justice to this theme of storytelling, do you have favorite stories from your time doing this podcast? Is there a style, a type of story that you find that you get very particularly excited about?
Yes, I do. I like stories where I'll use an example from a recent episode about ostrich eggshell beads that we did.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
I remember this one.
Ostrich eggshell beads are really cool for what they are. Humans shaped them by hand very specifically in certain ways. But then they also, because of their organic nature, they trap time. So you can date, you can use them as a method of dating in and of themselves. And so I wanted to do a 2-part series about jewelry because I think it's really an interesting human thing that we do.
Yeah.
And then I got to talk to these 2 scientists who did this incredible study about ostrich eggshell beads. They amassed the biggest collection of ostrich eggshell beads, which are kind of a common artifact across Africa. So there's lots and lots and lots of them, but nobody ever thought they were important. That's one element of the story that I like.
Yeah.
Like this person, the right person came along and said, I think there's something to learn from this. And I'm going to go and get as many as I can from all across Africa and put it all together and see what I can see using these beads. Then another person comes along who's like just the right collaborator, who's like, oh my gosh, I'm looking at this and I see something different. The scientist is Jennifer Miller, who's the archaeologist looking at the beads. And her colleague, Yiming Wang, is a paleoclimatologist.
Oh.
So they had noticed this pattern in the beads that they were the same for tens of thousands of years across like thousands of kilometers apart. So South Africa and Eastern Africa. And they were the same. And then all of a sudden they were different. And that might not seem like it matters.
Yeah.
But it tells you that like, okay, people were learning from each other, how to make these beads, or the beads were somehow traveling, or like, how do you know how they got to make them exactly the same? Because they were the same. Like,
Yeah.
And you can make a bead look like anything. Like nobody knows what a bead is supposed to be. You can make it like anything. It's shaped by humans. And then they found this incredible like climate story within those beads, that there was a giant flood that flooded the Zambezi River catchment and separated these 2 populations of people who lived like 80,000 years ago, separated them. And then they developed different ways of making the beads. And then they came back together again and made them the same way again. And then geneticists came in and they found the same pattern in DNA.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know, it's just like all these lenses that people use to look at the past and all the threads that come together. I find it really exciting. So I like those kinds of stories. Or like, a bone that was in a drawer and nobody knew what it was. And then the right person came along.
Yeah. It's funny, you were saying before, musing about the potential for a television show, or we're relating these to stories, and hearing that kind of story makes me think of like crime shows, forensic shows where the goal is we have this disparate evidence. Now we have to go through the process of figuring out what it is. And that is one of the most popular types of stories in pop culture. People love crime shows and forensic shows. And there is a similar appeal in science of having the story of, yes, no one else had looked at this, or no one else had put these clues together. And then we kept having to go to different people. And, oh, now we have to take it to the lab. And, oh, there's a specialist I know in this other place. And then it comes together into this great story at the end that you've uncovered information that no one could have figured out otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah. And through those beads, they found the oldest evidence of a social network.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's amazing to me. And then there are the straight up action stories, like the story of Rising Star Cave and Homonoleti, where they're going through these treacherous caves and finding
Mhm.
thousands of fossils there, bringing them back. Classic story.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like you saying they discovered the first social network connects back to what you were saying about feeling like you have an endless topic, where there's just something very universal about a human story, to where it's like, humans aren't my favorite animals. I like reptiles.
Mhm.
But I
Mhm.
still get excited when we get a piece of news that's like, here's this neat thing ancient people did. Did you know they used glue? I didn't. That's awesome.
Yeah,
What?
I use glue.
That's so, and it's
Yeah.
that story of them making the same beads, then getting separated and coming up with different beads, and then coming together to make a new same bead. We've seen that happen in media and in art and in video game, like in things that we experience today as humans, of like, oh yeah, no, these two groups started doing it, and then they came together, and this new kind of music came out of it, and that's how we got, hip hop or jazz or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so just innately relatable, because humans were having human experiences the whole time.
Yes. Yeah, I think like, oh my gosh, what's that cool thing you're wearing? Can you show me how to make that? Or where can I get one?
Well,
Yeah.
it feels like, because so often when we think of ancient people, it's very easy for them to get pushed into that, like, the ancient savages of
early people who were uncivilized,
Yeah.
or didn't have any of the technologies
who
or
weren't
knowledge that we
us.
have.
They
Right,
were
not
past people.
Not like regular people.
But then you learn about it, and it's like, I can 100%. I can almost picture the conversation, not
Right.
in the same language, but like I can picture basically how that would have gone, because I've done that with people.
Mhm.
Like, what are you making? Show me how to make it. That's cool. Like in class, when someone makes some like little foldy piece of paper, and
Yeah.
you're like, well, I didn't know you can make ninja stars. Make me a ninja star. I'm gonna
teach me how to do the fortune.
I want to.
teller thing.
Yeah. How did you do that? Do one for me. Make me one. And then everyone in class is gathered around. Me too.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, I feel lucky. So
It's great.
I think that it really gets to, we've talked a bunch on the podcast about how paleontology is in this very fortunate space, especially if you're talking about something like dinosaurs,
yeah.
where it feels like half the work is done for you.
Yes.
You don't have to convince anybody to be excited about dinosaurs. They're dinosaurs.
We're going to talk about dinosaurs. Now, wait a minute. Hold on. Don't turn off your...
Right. And I often think to myself, if there is any part of the ancient sciences that has that advantage even more than dinosaurs, it's ancient people.
Yes.
It's talking about humans and talking about human history. Do you find, are there particular avenues of anthropology and paleoanthropology, Meredith, that you find are more challenging to communicate or to relate, even if it is about humans doing human stuff?
That's a really good question. Let me think about that for just a minute. There's
Mhm.
a lot I find challenging about it,
Yeah.
I mean, because I think although people can relate when they think about human evolution as people in the past, but I think there are these layers of, like the scientific species names and who lived when and for how many million, and like, wait, long stretches of deep time are a little bit tricky. It's hard to picture what a million years is, or even 100,000 years as humans. And I think people do get confused by all the species names, even though there's not as many humans as dinosaurs. But then, kids remember dinosaur names. They dig it. They love to remember, but I haven't met anybody whose kid is like, oh, Australopithecus afarensis. Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't know. You have you met people like
I've certainly come across kids who have a bit of that paleo-anthro knowledge, but I think you're absolutely right that, speaking very overgeneralizing, that dinosaurs appeal to kids and humans appeal to adults,
Well,
which of course is a gross oversimplification, but you don't, that point in your life when you are a sponge for stuff like scientific names as a little kid often is focused on other aspects of the science as opposed to, Homo naledi and Homo erectus and Neanderthals and such and stuff like that.
Well, and I think dinosaurs are like Pokemon in the fact that it's like, this one's got horns, this one's got spikes.
It's baby's first lore.
And they are extremely distinct, and like, if I say my favorite Triceratops, you can already go, oh, okay. It's like saying your favorite Ninja Turtle. Like, I already get a little bit of a glimpse into what you're about, because there are certain features. The different human and human ancestors are a much more subtle gradient. There's a lot of interesting things to be said there, but if I just show you pictures, you don't immediately go, cool, so that one's the wisecracking one, and that one's the one that's tough.
That one wears an orange headband.
Yeah, like dinosaurs, you can just look at T-Rex and you're like, cool. Even if we come up with different personalities, I'm going to give that a different personality than when you show me a Brontosaurus, an Apatosaurus type thing.
Yeah.
I think there's it's harder to just make that snap connection.
Yeah. Well, in the world of science and scientific investigation comes with its own language, and kids are better at learning language than adults are. There are ways that our brains work, ways that our brains absorb information that work differently when we're kids versus when we're adults. And I think people so often, especially, in working at museums and stuff, I so often hear people say, it's so hard to work with kids. It can be so difficult to teach kids. I'm an adult. I get how adults work. It can be really challenging for people to figure out how to make that connection. Personally, I often find that it can be a lot more challenging to do science communication for adults in many cases, because you're competing with so much other priority, so much other knowledge. Adults are people who have already built an understanding of the world.
Yeah, they might have to unlearn stuff
or add something new in there. So now, of course, that's not to say that, ancient humans are only something for adults or that dinosaurs are only something for kids, but addressing what your audience is going to be interested in, what your audience is going to connect with, can be tough.
Yeah, it is hard to compete, but I feel like as people who make science podcasts, and I think the way people listen to podcasts, like as they're going about their lives or to help them pass time and learn at the same time, I think it's a really great medium for science communication to people who are interested, at least a little bit. I think that's working to our advantage as science podcasters, because the people want to know.
Well, and that also lines up with talking about using stories, that now it's got kind of the dual benefit of a science lecture and an audiobook. You're getting a story and you're learning facts at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's so fun. I love to do it. It's not always easy to do, but it's always rewarding to do.
Yeah. We were talking earlier about, you were describing sort of the format of the show. And speaking of things that are geared towards, particular types of audience, particular ages, on our podcast and a lot of the other science podcasts that we've talked to the hosts, it is structured very much as, here's us having kind of a conversation, kind of explaining things along the way. Your podcast, as you were describing, is very much, you've got some narration, you've got people talking, you're going through the story. It is a format that in my head, I think of as NPR style.
Yeah.
It's very much like journalistic reporting. How do you like that format? What do you find to be sort of the benefits of approaching it that way, as opposed to something like what we do, which is, two people talking and explaining a bunch of stuff?
I feel like, since I'm not a person with a scientific background, but I'm a person with a deep curiosity about it, I don't think I'd be good at a conversational type show. I don't feel like I do interviews well. Although I've interviewed a lot of people, and I love to interview people, but I don't think I would feel confident enough to do a show that's not the style of show that I do. And it was definitely very NPR influenced. I think at the time that I got the idea to do the show, I was listening to a lot of that stuff, and I was taking a class through the Duke Center for Documentary Studies. I've always wanted to make documentaries, and So I knew from the beginning that this was the style of show that I wanted to do. And I knew it was not easy. I knew that it was very labor intensive and time consuming because I was listening to everything that I could about narrative audio storytelling, and I was really trying to learn. I knew it was going to take a lot of work for every episode,
Mm-hmm.
but wow, it really takes a lot of work.
But when they said a lot, they meant a lot.
Yeah, they meant a lot. But I'm fortunate that I have had Audrey Quinn, our editor, from the beginning, and I've worked with another amazing editor, Julia Barton, who did Malcolm Gladwell's. She edited his podcast. She's a great story editor, and Audrey Quinn was our editor from the beginning, and then she left to go do some other things, and then she came back, and so she's been back with the show for the past couple of years, and it's just been really remarkable to work with someone like her. And now I also have a producer whose name is Ray. Yeah, Ray Pang, and he's so talented and wonderful, and he's also really curious about human evolution, and he does have a anthropology background, but in social anthropology, cultural anthropology.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
But it makes him a real good interviewer and, storyteller too. So it's really fun to have a team. I used to just make the show. I had Audrey to help me shape the stories, and then I did everything else. So all the interviews and the audio editing and all the writing and the narration and the mixing and scoring it, all that stuff. And now I have some help, so it's great.
Well, that's fantastic. I think that this is another important point that keeps coming up in this series, that you have to pick a production style that works for you.
Yes.
The way that you do origin stories, we could not do.
Yeah.
That's just not a format. That kind of production is something that we would have a difficult time with, a difficult time keeping consistent or keeping current. In your case, you also have the incredible position of doing the podcast as part of an organization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
With whom your podcast's mission and goals line up, which is something that we've had other people on this series who have explicitly said that they keep their podcast separate from any organization or institution because they want to keep that sort of creative control. The benefit, of course, is that you have a team of people who are all on the same page and who are part of this organization's overall mission, which sounds like a really great position to be in.
Yeah. And we have no shortage of stories to tell because we fund about 100 or so research projects a year.
Yeah.
So these are all grant recipients in all kinds of fields of study going out and doing cool stuff. And hopefully they would want to tell us about it so we can share the work. In that way, not everybody wants to do it,
Sure.
but I have found that scientists are very motivated to share their work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that that's we talk so often in science communication about the benefit for the listener, that this is something we're doing for the sake of the audience so that they can learn, so that they can indulge their curiosity. But I think it's really important to reflect on the importance of science communication for the scientists. In the case of something like origin stories, the stories that you're telling are the stories of people who are active in science right now, people who the audience may never have heard about, people who, I don't want to say no one has ever heard about, but, they work in their particular realm and they know their colleagues, and that's about it. Giving scientists the opportunity to promote themselves, to share their own work, to get some experience in communicating their science is an extremely valuable aspect of especially a podcast like yours, where the scientists are putting their voices right there on the podcast. It's their research that they did with this organization's support. That's an incredibly important aspect of that.
Yeah, and I think I have had messages, a couple from teachers who say that's really a valuable thing for the podcast, for their students to hear the scientists talking about doing the work, that it connects with them in a different way, to be like, I was looking over there and I saw something poking out of the earth and then I found it and then, we took it back to the lab, and just hearing them as humans telling their story. Students connect with that, so it feels really good.
And it connects the fun facts or science info that they would typically learn to an actual person and event, because so often when you get those fun facts, they're completely disconnected from how we know them.
Yes,
It's just,
you're just getting the end result
Yes.
of the science.
Yeah, did you know that we think ancient people did this? I didn't know that, but I now also don't know how we know that,
Right.
or why we ask that question, or who found it out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so fun. There are so many questions and so many ways to look at it. I wish I could make more episodes than I can. We make
Yeah.
about 10 a year or so. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
not a high volume podcast, but hopefully the stories are interesting and valuable to people.
It's quality over quantity.
Well, and fortunately, as we've discussed in some of our other interviews, we are in a time now where there are lots of podcasts and lots of social media accounts and video series that are addressing these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And it's lovely to be able to say, and we've said this to we'll have people, our listeners, who will reach out and say, oh, I'd love to hear more about these topics. I'd love to hear more about paleoanthropology, or have you guys done any episodes? Because now we've got going on 200 episodes, which is a preposterous archive to have to wade through. People will say, have you talked about these topics? And we get to say, well, we haven't really touched on those things a bunch, and we probably aren't going to get very much into that more often in the future. But have you heard of Origin Stories? Have you heard of this other podcast that has some of that information, that is a style that you might like as much or better than ours, that is covering topics that you might be interested in? That's an incredible thing that we get to do now because there is this variety.
Yeah, I love that you're doing this series interviewing other podcasters. I find it really inspiring, and I really want to listen to all of them when they come out, because it's like a opportunity to talk shop and get a glimpse into how other people are doing this same job that we all share. So it's cool.
Yeah, we've been having a lot of fun. It is a great opportunity for us to get to hear from other people, hopefully for our audience to get to hear. And much like we bring up with science, to deliver the implicit message that there isn't one way to do science communication.
Yes.
Origin Stories and our podcast are different from each other in a bunch of ways, right? The people, the experiences of the people who are doing it, the topics you're covering, the format is quite different. The general philosophy of these podcasts are built on different pillars of science communication, and yet both of them clearly work, right? We both have audiences. We both have people who email us and say nice things about what we're doing. And I think that delivering that message of, if you want to engage with SciComm, there's a bunch out there that you can find. And if you want to participate in SciComm, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. There's a bunch of different paths to take to get there.
Yeah, you don't have to be a scientist to do SciComm. And you can be a scientist and do great SciComm too.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of right ways to do SciComm, which is also delightful, because one way that works for someone might not work for someone else, or just might not be what you're in the mood for that day.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I'm in the mood for a documentary, let's watch something for an hour. And other times, like, I just want a 5-minute YouTube video about ants. I don't have the energy to sit down for 20 minutes. I just want to see some fun facts really quick.
Yep. It's great. There's enough room for everybody.
Yes. Meredith, you mentioned that Origin Stories has been going on for almost 10 years now.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. So this 2024 is your 10-year anniversary.
2025. So we're 9 years old now. And
Gotcha.
We'll be 10-year-old show in April 2025.
Okay. Well, that's amazing. Congratulations for sure. Are there things that you found that have changed for you? Your perspective on science communication, your understanding of how to do the things that you're doing. How has that changed in that decade that you've been doing this now?
So much. Yeah, it's changed so much. I was so scared to talk about science when I first started, because I thought you did have to be a scientist to do it.
Yeah.
even though I had this like paid job to do it, and they hired me for some reason. I was scared. And I was scared to talk to scientists because I was like, they'll know I don't know what that is. And I still feel
Yeah.
actually, no. And yeah, I was thinking about this today as I was preparing to talk to you all about like how my thoughts on science communication have shifted over time, because I do a lot of it. I do the podcast, and I do the social media, and I write a blog, and I write a newsletter, and I write a lot. And I'm just like in this perpetual state of learning and trying to do it better all the time. And I don't know the answer to the question. Hold on. 'Cause I'm like trying to think like,
Yeah.
how has it changed? I feel like I'm so always in motion, like reading stuff and writing stuff, that I don't take the time I should to reflect on that, and I would like to do that before the 10-year anniversary of the show. It's like, oh, how has this changed over time? I'm sure if I went back and listened to those old episodes, I would find a million things I'd want to do differently.
Mhm.
Yep.
That's what happens to us.
Yep.
Yeah.
I 100% relate.
Do you go back and listen?
We try not to.
No, not really.
Yeah.
I've heard them before. The most listening I did was when we were updating our YouTube, and I had to go into each episode to like update
like the timestamps.
the
and stuff.
timestamps to like
Yeah.
find and make sure everything was on track. So I had to actually listen through, and every now and then I'd get to one and be like, "Ooh, this is rough. Let's do this one as fast as we can." And I forgot how bad that mic sounded.
Yeah. Every now and then we'll be going through, and there'll just be like a loud cough in the middle of an episode. And it's like, what were we doing?
Yeah,
who edited that episode? Whose job was that?
It's like we're all learning as we go, and making stuff can get messy,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and this is another theme that has come up in this series, is that paleontology, paleo-related sciences podcasters that we've talked to, a lot of us and our colleagues are just kind of just figuring it out as we go. There isn't a manual for this. There are best practices. There is research. There is research that supports science communication practices. One of our guests in this series is a SciComm researcher.
Oh.
But we're kind of figuring it out. It seems that we certainly have experienced this, and we've heard from other podcasters who say the same thing, that we are continuously surprised by our own success.
Yeah.
I remember the first time we had, so Meredith, for any listeners who don't know, was our guest for episode 132, where we talked about Mary and Louis Leakey, part of our Darwin Day tradition of talking about historical scientists. Although the Leakeys aren't that historical, they're relatively recent as scientists go. And I remember we were so excited to have you join us on the podcast, because we were like, Origin Stories is so cool, and it's this great successful podcast. And
we're working with a real podcast.
Yeah, real people who know what they're doing. And it absolutely for us felt like asking up.
Yes.
Right. We were saying we are reaching out to people who have been around longer than us, who know what they're doing, who are more successful, better in every way. We're reaching out.
I won't blame you if you don't answer this email.
Absolutely. We might not even hear back. And then we had you come on the podcast, and the first thing that I think you said this in the email you responded with, where you said, "Wow, this is so great. I'm so excited to be asked by your podcast. I think your podcast is great." And it was this very weird cognitive dissonance moment where I was like, well, hang on though. We have this perspective.
No, those are my lines.
This is what we're supposed to say. And it was this very sweet moment of like, oh, okay, none of us feel confident in what we're doing. We're all kind of winging it.
The imposter syndrome is real.
Oh, so real. Yeah, for sure. And I really feel that way. I was so excited to get asked, and I was really excited to get asked again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I do remember thinking, like, is anybody going to listen to this? What?
Yeah.
I have to. My boss finally, she was like, you cannot delay putting out this first episode anymore. Gotta put it out. It'll be fine. I was so scared. But yeah, I was really surprised. and pleased, that people have listened to the show and enjoyed it and that we get to continue on. So.
Yeah. I think that this is, in addition to the perception of SciComm only being available to certain people, right? This idea that people often get, well, you have to be a scientist, or well, you have to be whatever.
You need some background education. If
Right.
you don't already understand it, then you're going to be lost.
This perception that there is a way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
There's also this perception that, to put it glibly, that we're all more professional than we actually are.
Yes.
That we get emails from people who are like, hey, hello to all the Common Descent team, and it's like,
us two,
me and Will. It's me and Will. That's two of us. Me and Will. Sometimes Allie, but mostly she just does the talking because that's. Hey, what we
David, get in here. It's the both of us.
Yeah, someone wants to talk to both of us. That it, much like the scientists behind the science are just people doing their best, the SciCommers behind the SciComm are people doing their best, and hopefully mostly succeeding.
Yes.
I think that's a great way to end this interview.
It was. We came.
And
it's
cut.
Yes, right.
That narrative satisfaction of coming around to a nice point. Meredith, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. We have had a great time talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
It's been a lot of fun.
Before we end things, if you would please take a moment and let our audience know where they can find you, where they can find origin stories, and if there's anything that you want to promote within that, please feel free to do so.
Okay, great. Well, they can find all the work we do at leakeyfoundation.org, and that's LEAKEY foundation.org, as I say on the podcast frequently. And we're on all the socials, so you can find us on Instagram and Facebook, and we're kind of not so much on Twitter these days. But
Same.
Yep.
It used to be fun, but you can cut that out.
No.
Maybe we'll leave it in.
Yeah, you can cut that out.
Elon will come find us.
And then we also have a YouTube channel where my colleague Ariel makes a really fun show called Lunch Break Science on the third Thursday of every month. So it's a part interview show and part like super short talk from a scientist in the field doing stuff. Sometimes she's even had people on the show like they're actively in Tanzania or Uganda or Kenya. So it's really fun. So you can find that on YouTube. And origin stories you can find wherever you are listening to this podcast right now.
Excellent. Listeners, if you haven't already, absolutely go check out Origin Stories. All of the podcasters that we have invited on for this series make great podcasts. You should check them out. And at risk of sounding like I'm playing favorites a little bit, Origin Stories is one of my personal favorites. I really like Origin Stories. You should totally check it out. You should check them all out. But for this episode, go down to the episode description and find links for finding Origin Stories.
Oh my gosh. This will keep me going for like another year. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
That's fantastic. Well, then a year from now,
yep.
We'll bring you back and we'll do another collaboration.
You have to have our maintenance crossovers to keep your energy, your fuel tank going.
It really does.
Right?
The experience of sitting down and chat. It's very well because we would used to get this as scientists at conferences. You go to an academic conference and you talk to a bunch of other researchers and you come away with ideas for 1,000 research projects you're never going to do. And you're all excited and you're ready to keep going. We don't get that as podcasters.
Yeah.
There's not a conference that we're going to talk to all the other podcasters. So this series and these kinds of collaboration efforts are really great for giving us the opportunity to get excited with somebody else about this thing that we do.
Yeah, I've always thought it'd be really fun to have a science podcasters, Slack group or Discord or something where we can connect and talk shop and like bounce things off each other and help promote each other and stuff.
Yeah. Oh, we should do that.
That would actually, because especially like when odd news pieces come up and things like where we know that a bunch of us are going to be talking about this to go, okay, cool. What is everyone's vibe on this right now? What can we all?
Right.
I'm having trouble pinning down what's actually the ins and outs or something.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Oh,
I did get to go to a conference once that was called Sound Education. That was all like educational podcasts from all different types of things. And that was super fun, but it only lasted, 2 days.
Yeah.
We'll have to put together like a series where we just do podcaster panels.
Yes.
And it's just, we invite a bunch of people on, whoever shows up, and then we just have a conversation about podcasting or paleontology or whatever topics we put together.
Yeah. Would you ever be interested in inviting somebody from like Radiolab or something to be on your show to talk about the
Ooh.
wild way that they do their shows?
That would,
Yeah.
Might be able
yeah.
to-
That could be really
like a
interesting.
producer from, like a NPR show. Could be fun.
That would be tons of fun.
I personally would be fascinated to get to learn more about because I think of that all the time when I watch some of the
Once again, how the professionals do.
Yeah,
How
exactly.
people who know what they're doing.
the real ones.
No, you are professionals
Yes, yeah.
and you know what you're doing. Their show,
But-
like those shows are just different.
Yeah,
Yes.
but I do always have that question of like, how do you put all this together? Like, because sometimes I'll see a
Yeah.
clip and then go, wait a minute, I've never seen that clip on any documentary. So you got that footage.
Yes.
Do you have like a film team? Do you have how involved was this episode that I just watched or whatever?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. I love to know how people make their shows. So
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if this stays in, then our listeners are getting to hear some of the how it works, the behind the scenes we're discussing with each other. So stay tuned for future collaborations and stuff. We will probably end up doing more of it.
Yeah. Would any of you want to hear us talk with people about that kind of behind the scenes stuff?
Oh yeah.
Speak up.
Oh yeah. Let us know. Oh, we're creating in them. This is it. The sausage is being made right now. Meredith, you are now part of a grand tradition going 7 years now at the Common Descent podcast, which is that we do not know how to end an episode. We just kind of ramble on with discussion. And I think that it is often an indication of how interesting the topic is, or in a case like this, how much fun we're having talking with our guest. Thank you again for joining us. This has been a whole lot of fun.
thank you both so much.
Listeners, check out Origin Stories, and don't forget that we are releasing episodes of this series, Spotlight 2024, all throughout the year, one episode a month throughout 2024. There are several other episodes for you to listen to. Go check it out. And now I'm out of words.
Yep.
Sign off phrase. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Common Descent podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and check our WordPress blog for pictures and links after each episode. Huge thanks to our patrons whose support helps keep this podcast running and who get access to bonus goodies on Patreon. The song you're hearing is called On the Origin of Species by Protodome, which we found at ocremix.org. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time.